single day, like I've always done and always will.
Yet another stand.
Welcome to this week's edition of New York Now. I'm Chantel Destra. With just a few weeks before the end of the legislative session, it's been quite a busy time at the state capitol, with lawmakers and advocates pushing for a slew of policy items they'd like to get passed. One priority that has been on the top of minds for advocates is the medical aid in dying bill. This is a bill that would essentially allow people who are terminally ill the ability to request medication from their healthcare provider to end their life. Supporters of the bill say that these patients deserve compassion, and that compassion would mean granting them the right to make a decision about their life. But on the other end of the issue, critics argue that if enacted, the bill has the potential to be widely misused. Those against the bill say that it could do more harm than good and are urging the legislature not to move forward with it. In April, the state assembly voted to pass the bill for the first time since it was introduced several years ago.
Thank you, Ms. Pollen. How do you vote?
I vote in the affirmative.
Ms. Pollen in the affirmative. Announce the results.
Ayes 81, noes 67.
The bill is passed.
Now, all eyes are on the state Senate to see if the measure will make it to the floor in the next few weeks. In this next segment, our Elise Kline gives us a deep dive on the medical aid in dying bill, from its history to its path ahead. Here's that story.
For 10 years, state lawmakers and advocates have tried to pass a bill that would legalize medical aid in dying. The bill has been stalled for years, never making it out of committees in both chambers of the legislature. This year, the bill made it farther than it ever has before, passing the state assembly. Assembly Health Committee Chair Amy Pollen says this has been a long time coming.
It's almost surreal and almost hard to believe that we passed it.
The controversial issue has a wide range of supporters, even from people who didn't initially support the legislation. The Medical Society of New York has not been a supporter of the legislation for almost the entirety of its 10-year period. But last year, the body changed its position. Jane Simpson, the vice speaker of the Medical Society of New York, says the organization was originally against the idea, concerned about proper safeguards. She says over time, watching other states implement this policy, they became and remained more neutral. And after seeing growing support and popularity among the public, they completely changed their minds.
It's important to know that the Medical Society is a democratic institution. And so really the big change that happened this year is that the members voted, or last year actually, the members voted and decided to support the medical aid in dying legislation.
Simpson, who has personally been a long supporter of the legislation, says she was excited to see the measure supported among her colleagues.
So to see my colleagues really rally around patients at end of life, I think that was really special to see and to respect their autonomy and wishes. I think that it's easy to ignore our patients at end of life, or even people at end of life as a society, because we don't get to hear their stories afterwards.
Assemblymember Al Taylor, a Democrat representing parts of Upper Manhattan and a pastor, was against the legislation for several years until his father passed away 2 years ago.
My wife and I took care of him at home, and he would say to me, "I can't live this way."
Taylor says his experience of listening to his dad begging for the end changed how he thought about this issue.
It's almost 2 years to the day that I passed some of my yellow shirts, and they said, but prior to that, if I saw them, I was like, don't even come near me. I'm not even interested, because I had my own idea of what it should look like. But when you think about it, all we're saying here in New York State is if you have a situation, you may or may not have to take that pill, but at least have access to it if you want. And that's it.
If enacted, the legislation would allow New Yorkers with a diagnosis of 6 months or less to live to request an oral medication to end their life. The legislation includes safeguards, including requiring a terminal diagnosis, needing 2 doctors to sign off, having 2 witnesses at the time of request, and having the medication be self-administered. However, the safeguards in the bill don't seem to satisfy the legislation's opposition. Max Rodriguez, the manager of government affairs at the Center for Disability Rights, says he doesn't feel there are strong protections in the bill.
As far as safeguards go, proponents of the legislation said there's plenty of safeguards, needing 2 doctors to sign off, to need a witness, to have a terminal diagnosis of 6 months or less to live. Don't really look at those as safeguards, or a little bit more speed bumps.
Rodriguez says they have concerns about this legislation expanding if it passes. He also says he worries about the message it sends to individuals with disabilities.
As we've seen in other states, the reason why people opt into this procedure is for a combination of things, most of which are centered around acquired disabilities from illness. When you look at the top 5 reasons in Oregon why people opt into the procedure, it's things like being less able to partake in daily activities, feeling like a burden among caregivers and friends and family, loss of bodily functions.
Additional opposition ranges from religious groups to doctors to Republicans and Democrats. State Senator George Borrello, a Republican representing parts of the Finger Lakes, says he is strongly opposed to the legislation.
My concern is this quickly spirals out of control, and New York State's version of assisted suicide is, as usual, is far more radical than any other state, to the point where there's really no controls in this bill on how this deadly medication will be handled.
Rabbi Solomon Diamond says he feels this legislation symbolizes murder.
If you're starting to uproot God's rule, it will go down all the way, but be maybe worse than animals.
However, Taylor argues that part of having faith is having compassion.
And there's a text. I think it's Micah 6:8. And it says, our job, according to God, is to walk humbly with your God, but also to do justice and seek mercy. So I think if we're going to help somebody and we have an opportunity to show mercy, let's do that.
State Senator Scarcella Spanton, a Democrat representing parts of Staten Island and a person of faith, says she respects religious groups' opposition, but stresses this is only an option.
This is not about legislating through a religious lens. This is about doing what's right for the greater good. And this is the right thing, to give people a compassionate choice at the end of their lives. I think as a person who is religious, that's what Jesus would have wanted, I'll be honest.
For many advocates fighting for the bill, compassion is at the heart of what they want out of this potential law. Darren Eilert has been advocating for the legislation since he lost his 24-year-old daughter, Ayla, to an aggressive tongue cancer in 2022.
She knew about medical aid and dying. She totally wanted to live. The cancer was just sucking everything out of her, including the doctors chased the pain, but did not keep up with it. The cancer outpaced the pain for Ayla.
Eilert says Ayla asked for medical aid in dying at the end of her life. And while he doesn't know if she would have ultimately taken it, he wishes she had that choice.
She was just an unbelievable woman that I can't even approach my level of understanding of how she could get through that pain. But knowing that medication was there, she would have been in peace.
Eilert says seeing the bill make progress this year means a lot to their family and to Ayla's memory.
It brings me back to Ayla's words of love everyone, even the hard ones. So I see a lot of opponents here. I totally love that they can have opinions, but don't push your opinions on others. Let them have their own choice. And Ayla would be just gleeful that this is moving forward, because she doesn't like to see people suffer.
Other advocates who've lost loved ones also felt meaning seeing the bill pass in the Assembly. Stacey Gibson has been an advocate since the first day of lobbying in 2015, only a year after her husband died from a progressive neurological disease. She says because he didn't have the option of medical aid in dying, he simply stopped eating and drinking.
It wasn't a death that was in keeping with his wishes or the way he led his life.
She says she was overjoyed to watch the bill pass the Assembly at the end of April.
To see this pass today is my ability to fulfill my promise to him, and I am just overwhelmed with gratitude.
Some Republicans who voted against the legislation say while they empathize with New Yorkers' painful stories, they feel there are other avenues to help people at the end of their lives. Assembly Minority Floor Leader Mary Beth Walsh, a Republican representing parts of Saratoga, Schenectady, and Fulton counties, says the state should first look at investing more in palliative and hospice care.
My feeling, where I really ended up coming down on this issue, is that
with New York being absolutely last for hospice and palliative care in rankings nationally, I really would like to see a lot of work done on that first. Get us to the point where we are providing the absolute best in the nation, hospice and palliative care. And then at that point, if there are still individuals that require something, then maybe we could look at it then.
Many lawmakers and advocates supporting the bill agree there is a needed investment in funding and resources towards palliative and hospice care. Some other opposition comes from some Democrats who voted against the bill because they worry about negative impacts on communities of different racial groups, income, and geographic areas already struggling with disparities in the healthcare system. Assemblymember Mikhail Salages, a Democrat representing parts of Nassau County and who voted against the legislation, says lawmakers should look at the existing barriers in the healthcare landscape.
And so when we talk about this illusion of choice, it's not a choice. I'm constantly hearing stories of people whose health insurance claims are being denied. We're in a profit-based healthcare system where the choices are not made for the patient, but for the dollar. And realistically, putting something like this on the table may force some people to make this illusionary choice because it's the only option for them.
Paulin argues while healthcare disparities are also concerning to her, she doesn't see a reason not to provide this option. Paulin also argues New York wouldn't be the first state to implement this legislation. 12 jurisdictions have legalized this policy measure.
If there was anything in the bill or any experience across the 30 years to show that there was any problems, we would have seen them already, and we haven't.
The legislation before passing in the Assembly 81-67 was debated for about 5 hours. Walsh says while she has her concerns about the legislation, she felt the debate was positive for the chamber.
I thought the debate was really a really good moment for the Assembly. I thought it was very thoughtful. I thought it was very respectful. The different points of view that we have on this incredibly complex and really hard topic. I thought everybody was very thoughtful. I was proud, and it was so nice to see almost every member in their seats.
New York could be the 13th jurisdiction if the Senate passes the bill, sending it to the governor's desk for her approval as the final step. To pass the Senate, it has to first get through committees. State Senator Gustavo Rivera, a Democrat representing parts of the Bronx and the Health Committee chair, says he's ready to help the bill pass through committee.
I'm looking forward to working with the sponsor of the bill, Senator Brad Holman-Siegel, on this potential movement, and I've always been supportive of it, and I'm looking forward to getting it done.
State Senate sponsor Brad Holman-Siegel, a Democrat representing parts of Manhattan, says he is confident the bill will move through the Senate because of the momentum it's gained through the Capitol passing in the Assembly.
We have 26 co-sponsors now, including myself and Senator Scarcella Spanton. So I'm confident we will continue the conversations with individual senators, with leadership.
Holman-Siegel says lawmakers between chambers often look to each other on more controversial bills like this one.
Their conference has coalesced behind this incredibly important issue. And I think that's a boost to my colleagues in the Senate who look to public opinion and what their constituents are thinking.
When asked by reporters about the possibility of bringing the bill to the Senate floor, Senate Majority Leader Andrea Stewart-Cousins said she would be happy to bring it to the floor, but as it stands now, there are not enough votes.
In order to pass anything, I need 32 votes, and I think we've got about 25 now that are on the bill, so it's short of what we would need to pass it.
The medical aid and dying bill did not make it on the agenda for the final Health Committee meeting of the year. However, it could still move through another committee, the Rules Committee, before getting to the floor for a possible vote. Lawmakers have about 2 weeks left to get the bill passed in the Senate before session comes to a close. It will also need to be signed by the governor in order to be enacted into law. Elise Kline, New York Now.
Now turning to another important topic. In addition to pushing for healthcare-related policy items, advocates have also been hoping to protect business owners this year. One such measure would crack down on interchange fees. This is a processing fee that business owners have to pay credit card companies when a customer uses a credit card. The issue is the 2.25% fee also includes taxes as well as tips. Small business owners say that this is cutting into their profits and want the state to take action. We sat down with State Senator James Skoufis to understand what's at stake for small business owners and how a newly introduced bill could help alleviate those issues. Here's that conversation. Thank you so much for joining us today, Senator.
My pleasure. Thank you.
Can you unpack the legislation that you've introduced that would essentially stop credit card companies from including state and local taxes as well as tips from their processing fees when they're charging businesses in the state?
Yeah, this sounds like a complicated issue, but it's pretty straightforward and it is pretty impactful. So right now, when anyone purchases a good or service in New York State and they use a credit card, they swipe their card through the reader or they use the chip. And as part of that transaction, using that piece of equipment to scan the credit card, the business, the employer, has to pay roughly a 3% fee. It's called an interchange fee on the transaction. That fee goes to the bank that is issuing the credit card or the credit card company, whoever's giving them that device, the scanner. And so the issue here is that 3% or so fee is not only being applied to the price of the good or service that the consumer is paying for, but the fees also being applied to the sales tax on that transaction. And if it's a restaurant or a bar, the tip on that transaction. And so why in the world should our mom and pop stores on Main Street be paying a fee to a credit card company on a tax that the state government, not the business, that the state government is applying to the transaction? It is unfair, it is not right, and so this bill does something very simple.
And what are you hearing directly from those small business owners about how those fees are impacting their finances and their profits?
One might think, oh, well, what's a little sales tax percentage on top of oftentimes small transactions, prices for goods and services? If you add it all up each and every year in New York State, just on these little slices of the fee, sales tax and tips, it works out to the businesses, our mom and pop stores, paying $1 billion a year to big banks and credit card companies. This bill, without the taxpayers having to spend a dime, will save our mom and pop and business community $1 billion a year. So this is very meaningful small business relief. It's something that I hope we can pass in the next few weeks. And for each restaurant, each bar, each mom and pop store, this could be thousands of dollars a year for each of them that they no longer have to pay to credit card companies and they can keep in their pockets. That circulates in our economy, is good for their families, is good for our communities. And that's why we're trying to pass this bill.
And I was actually going to ask you about that perspective that you mentioned earlier. What would you say to people who may argue that that fee is not that much in comparison to how much the business owners are making on the sale?
Well, so it adds up. And that's the thing. You know, if it's just one transaction, yeah, maybe it's not a big number that they're paying to the bank or the credit card company. But some businesses have hundreds and hundreds of transactions a day, thousands over the course of a year, and you add them all up. It's a lot of money that businesses are paying as fees to the sales tax portion of each of these transactions. And so it is actually very substantial. It's thousands, it's tens of thousands of dollars in some cases, not for some big businesses. These are, I'm talking numbers for small, medium-sized restaurants and barbershops and all the Main Street mom and pop stores that we come to love in all of our communities. It's thousands of dollars a year for them.
And do you think that the average shopper or consumer understands why this is an important issue that's impacting their community? And how are you hoping to bring more awareness to this issue?
Well, after watching this segment, they will be more aware of this issue and its impact on their community. Short of being a viewer of your show, or you're listening to some of the interviews that I've offered on this bill, most people probably are not aware of this issue. The business owners certainly are. All the ones that I've spoken to, they know this is a problem. They know that this hits them in their pocketbook for no legitimate reason. But the average consumer probably has no idea. Before learning about this issue, I had no idea that this was a problem or was happening. And so part of this is, yes, raising the awareness for the general public, and certainly, though, as it pertains to trying to pass this bill, raising the awareness among my colleagues in the state legislature.
And with the state budget being several weeks late this year, there isn't a lot of time left in the legislative session to address bills and other policy items. So how do you hope to get this over the finish line before lawmakers return to their districts for the summer?
I am cautiously optimistic that we are going to be able to pass this through the state Senate. I've had a lot of conversations with my Senate colleagues. They've been very favorable, very positive towards this. Look, and this is one of those things where, this isn't just as though, it's a bill that impacts 1 or 2 or 3 districts and Senate colleagues. We all have small businesses. We all hear from our mom and pops who are struggling to keep their doors open. And when my colleagues learn about this issue, they realize, the light bulb goes off, as it did for me, that passing this bill helps keep thousands of dollars in their pockets, in the pockets of our mom and pops, keeps their doors open, doesn't cost the state a single nickel to provide this relief. It comes at the expense of credit card companies and big banks. And I'm sorry, I'm not losing any sleep at night, and most of my colleagues are not losing any sleep at night if the big banks are losing a little bit of money that can stay in the pocketbooks of our mom and pops.
You mentioned those conversations with your colleagues in the state Senate. Are you expecting any movement in the Assembly?
We're working very hard. We have an excellent Assembly sponsor in John McDonald. I've worked on many bills with him over the years, and he is championing this. I'm obviously not as acutely aware of the dynamics over there. I'm not in the Assembly chamber, but I know he's working very hard. He's having the same conversations that I'm having, and certainly we're hopeful that this is going to pass both houses in the next few weeks.
Illinois actually passed this very legislation known as the Interchange Fee Prohibition Act, and it's set to take effect in July. With more and more states moving towards passing legislation like this, do you think it's time for the federal government to get involved in this regulation?
It's time for the federal government to be regulating a lot of anti-consumer activity. In fact, the federal government now is moving in the exact opposite direction and dismantling a lot of our consumer protections. And so yes, I think the federal government should be handling this and many, many other anti-consumer predatory behavior and issues that we see. But in the absence of federal action, we as states need to step in. New York has one of the largest economies, not just in the country, but the entire world. We have untold millions and millions of transactions that happen over the course of a year in New York State. And if the federal government will protect our small business community and our consumers and our taxpayers and all the folks who make up our small business ecosystem, then New York State government should.
So have you had any conversations with your counterparts in Congress to bring something like this to the floor?
I haven't. This is a relatively new bill. It was introduced only recently, and it's really only this legislative session that we're getting traction. And so I've been very focused on trying to get this done where I am in the state legislature. But certainly, I speak with my federal counterparts with some regularity, and this is something I'm going to be communicating to them that I hope that they can bring up. But like I said, I think the political environment in Washington they've been very clear. They're moving in the exact opposite direction of what we're trying to do with this bill.
And lastly, how much would something like this cost the state to implement and monitor to make sure that these credit card companies are actually complying with the law?
So it wouldn't cost the state anything. The state does not pay for the readers. The state does not pay for, we don't monitor, the reader technology and is it working this way or that way. At the end of the day, though, if businesses are seeing that the credit card companies are not complying with the law, they will file complaints and lawsuits with the state, and there will be even greater pain for those big banks and credit card companies. And look, all these folks, in their ivory towers on the financial sector side, they've got armies of compliance attorneys and lawyers, and they are going to be told that they have to follow this law. Visa and MasterCard and all these companies, their lawyers will tell their folks, we have no choice but to follow this law. And so I have faith and confidence that it will be followed. But if it's not, there's certainly going to be recourse and penalties, and then they'll have to deal with that.
Well, unfortunately, that's all the time we have for today. Thank you so much for taking the time to speak with us today, Senator.
Always my pleasure. Thank you.
And we were speaking with State Senator James Skoufis. And for more information on interchange fees in the state, you can visit our website. Again, that's at nynow.org. You can also subscribe to our newsletter for exclusive content at newsletter.nynow.org or by scanning the QR code on your screen. Well, that does it for this edition of New York Now. Thank you for tuning in, and see you next week.
Funding for New York Now is provided by WNET,